We continue now at the top of Daf Nun Ches Amud Beis in Meseches Bava Metzia. This is Bava Metzia Daf 58b. And the previous Amud Tana, which is an individual who teaches brises in the Beis Medrash, he taught a brisa to Rabbi Yitzchak, and the brisa seemed to be completely backwards. It was about Korban Shvua and Kodshim. And so now Rabbi Yitzchak responds, Ipcha mistabra. It seems to be that the exact opposite of what you're saying would be more logical. Rashi explains, Ipcha mistabra, the opposite is more logical. Kol hadvarim nir hepech. Everything that you're saying, it seems the opposite. What it means is as follows. Let's say you have Kodshim that the owner is not responsible for. So that's the Hashem ninhu tvei. That should be more associated with Hashem, so to speak. More than that which the owner is responsible. If the owner is responsible, it's more like the owner's. If the owner is not responsible for the Kodshim, then it's more like Hashem's. And again, the Brisa seems to say the opposite. Now, if you wanted to say that the person is chayev a korban shvua, if he denies what belongs to gavoa, what belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ulapotro b'shel hedron, and you wanted to exempt him in a case where more belongs to the person, which is actually the opposite of what makes sense. But if you wanted to say that, kain haya lo lomer, it should have said as follows in the Brisa: Kodshim shechayev b'achriyus, and if you have Kodshim that the owner is responsible for, potter, so then he's potter a korban shvua. Again, the case of korban shvua is the person watching over the item. He denies that he owes the item, he takes a false shvua, then he admits. So he brings this korban shvua. So you should have said, if it's chayev b'achriyus and he's potter, why? Shani kori bohen ba'amiso v'kichesh, because that's ba'amiso, that's with his neighbor. And with his neighbor, we're going to say there's no korban shvua. And then you would say, she'eno chayev b'achriyus, and if you have kodshim that the owner is not responsible for, so chayev, then the person watching over it is chayev a korban shvua, shani kori bohen b'Hashem v'kichesh, because that's called b'Hashem, and that's what you're chayev for. And so that's what you should have said if that's what you held. And furthermore, it's backwards in another way, because it should be the opposite. V'yod, and further, the head yod havalei l'chiyuvei tvei, by when it belongs to a regular person, there it's more likely to be chayiv a korban shvua, not less likely. The hashomer hekdeshos patur min hashvua, because again, we've said people who watch over hekdesh are patur from taking an oath, when we call habal yoda, and from anything that emerges from that oath. In this case, the korban, talking about the korban shvua. So essentially, Rabbi Yitzchak said to this Tana who taught this brisa that everything in this brisa is backwards. So Amar Lei, so the Tana said back, Ismi, and Rashi says Ismi means Asir Mishnah Zumi Gerusasi. I'm going to remove this Mishnah from what I taught. This brisa is incorrect. And so the Gemara continues, Amar Lei, he said back to him, meaning Rabbi Yitzchak said back, Lo, no, you don't have to remove it. Rather, we can change it as follows. What it means is as follows. Hachi Gomer, this is what it means to say. Kodshim shechayv b'achriyus, and if you have kodshim where the owner is responsible, so then chayev, so then he's chayev a korban shvua. Disrabu mi b'Hashem v'kichesh. What that means is it's included, even though it is somewhat belonging to Hashem, because it's kodshim, but it is not fully Hashem. There's a responsibility on the owner, so it's somewhat belonging to the owner, so therefore there's a korban shvua. That's what the brisa means to say. V'she'eno chayv b'achriyus, and if you have kodshim that the owner is not responsible, so then he's potter from korban shvua, di'imit mi ba'amiso v'kichesh, because then it's excluded, because it has to be amiso, and already in this case it's not amiso at all, it's essentially completely Hashem. Rashi says, Hachi Kamer, this is what it means to say, Hai shani kore bohen b'Hashem v'kichesh, when the brisa says that I refer to this as b'Hashem, lo mashma b'Hashem v'kichesh v'lo ba'amiso. It doesn't mean b'Hashem and not amiso, u'lechiyuve, and to say chayev, mishum shehein shal hekdesh, that it's chayev korban shvua because it belongs to hekdesh. You're just interpreting it wrong. El Hachi Kamer, this is what it means to say, Kodshim shechayev b'achriyus, and if you have kodshim where the owner is responsible, chayev korban shvua, the person is chayev korban shvua, lefi shehein shal amiso, because it's amiso, because it's his neighbors. V'yim basel lepotra, and if you want to say pater lefi shehein shal hekdesh, because it belongs to hekdesh, lahachi yasa b'Hashem v'kichesh, that's why the pasuk says b'Hashem v'kichesh l'ribuyinu, to say no, it's still included. Afim yesh bohen sad gavo, even though there is some side of gavo over here, that's not enough to exempt. And the same the other direction. V'she'en chayev b'achriyus and pater, if the owner is not responsible, so then he's pater from a korban shvua, because it's totally b'Hashem. Lefi shani korei b'hen lematon ba'amiso v'kichesh, because here it's excluded because it's not ba'amiso. V'hacha leka amiso, here you don't have amiso. V'imit mi be'amiso v'kichesh, so it's excluded from ba'amiso v'kichesh. And the Gemara continues with the two dots. The Mishnah said, Rabbi Yehuda says, Af hamocher sefer Torah margelis ubehema. Also, if someone sells a sefer Torah, a pearl, or a domesticated animal, ein lohem ona, there is no ona in these cases. And the Gemara says, Tanya, we learned in a brisa. Rabbi Yehuda says, Av hamocher sefer Torah ein lo ona. If somebody sells a sefer Torah, there's no ona. Lefisha ein kates lidmei. The reason is because there really is no end to its value. You can't say ona, you can't say exploitation by something that really is essentially limitless value. Behema umargalis, when you're talking about a domesticated animal and a pearl, ein lahem ona, there also there's no ona, because a person wants to pair it up. Let's say a person has an animal that goes well with this animal because you have two two animals pulling on the plow, let's say, or margalis with when it comes to a pearl, you might match it up with a pearl you already have, and so therefore it could be worth a lot more than essentially, so to speak, market value. That's what Rabbi Yehuda said. Amrlo, they said to him, Hakol Adam Rotzel Azagban, but don't people want to pair up anything? Why only these items? There are other things you also pair up. And the Gemara says to that, for Rabbi Yehuda responds, Hani Chashivile, these are considered more important to him. V'hani lo Chashivile, the other items, they're not as important to him. And Rashi says, L'zavgon misha yesh lo shor yafa l'charisha. Somebody has an axe that's good for plowing. Mechazar al achar shekamosa l'tzamdu imobol. He's looking for another axe similar to his axe that he could put together in the yoke. Shahamatzmid shor cholash im habori. Because, for example, you would take a weak axe and put it with a healthy axe. Makalkal es habori. You're going to ruin the healthy axe. V'chein margalis. No, the same would be by a nice pearl. L'malos im chaverta bezov min hayachidus. You want to fill together with the one that accompanies it well. So that's why. And then the Gemara said chashivile v'chaviv le zivugan. This is something that is important to him to pair up, and that's why there is no onah. And the Gemara continues, Viad Kamen, until how much do we say is not considered to be onah when it comes to these items? Amar Amemar says, Ad Kedei Demeim, until their value. Rashi explains, Viad Kamen lo have onah, until how much is it not considered to be onah? Kedei Demeim Kiflai, meaning double. Up until double the value is not a problem of onah. Once you're already hitting double the value, that already could be onah, even by these items. And the Gemara continues, Tanya, we learned in a brayser, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Omer, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says, Ava mocher sus, even if someone sells a horse, v'sayah for a sword, v'chatitum, some translate chatitum as a helmet. Rashi says chatitum is a muggin, is a shield. In any case, you sell a horse or a sword or a shield, b'melchama, at a time of war. So those also, ein lahem onah, there is no onah there, b'mnei sheyesh ben chay nefesh, because that's in order to preserve life, and so people are willing to pay more money. B'melchama, b'socha melchama means again, during the war. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Kashem shonah b'mekach u'memkar, just like there's onah by buying and selling, kach onah b'dvarim, so too there's onah with words. That's mistreatment of other people using words. For example, the Mishnah says, Lo yomar lo bekama chayfetz, a person shouldn't say to a seller, how much is this object? V'u'eino rotzelikach, he really doesn't want to buy it. Or im haya bal tshuva, if a person's a bal tshuva, a person has repented, lo yomar lo, he shouldn't say to him, Zechor ma'asecha harishonim, remember your earlier deeds when you used to sin. Im hu ben geirim, or let's say a person is the son of converts, lo yomar lo, he shouldn't say to him, Zechor ma'aseh avosecha, remember what your fathers used to do. Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, v'ger lo sona v'lo silchatzena, you can't mistreat the ger, you can't oppress the ger. This is the concept of onoas devarim. And the Gemara says, Tanu Rabban, and the rabbis taught, Lo sonu ishas amiso. Again, it says Lo sonu. You can't oppress the person. But onas devarim hakasa medaber. That's talking about mistreatment with words. Ata omer bonas devarim. Now you think you're saying the pasuk is talking about onas devarim. Oeno ela bonas mammon. Maybe it means exploitation in terms of money, as we've talked about earlier. And the Gemara says to that, Kishu Omer, when it says V'chisimkru memkar lamisecha, that the Brisa says, when the pasuk says V'chisimkru memkar lamisecha, when you sell something to your neighbor, Okonim yada misecha, or you buy from your neighbor, there it talks about onah, hare onah asmamon amr. So there we're already talking about onah asmamon, hamani mekayim losonu ishas hamiso. So what does the pasuk mean when it says losonu ishas hamiso, but onah devarim? It's talking about onah devarim. It's talking about mistreatment through words. Haketz that how so im hayabal tshuva al yomer lo zechor masecha. If a person's a Baal Tshuva, don't say to him, remember your earlier deeds. If he's the son of converts, don't say, remember what your fathers did. If he's a convert, he wants to learn Torah. He shouldn't say to him, the same mouth that is eating nevelos and trefus, non-kosher food essentially, and shkatzim and remasim is eating disgusting creatures and creeping creatures. Balil motorah, that same mouth is coming to learn Torah, shenemra mipia gavura, which was said from the mouth of the Almighty. And imhayu yisurin boin olive, let's say a person is experiencing yisurin, he's experiencing afflictions, imhayu chaloim boin olive, or let's say illness is coming upon him, oshay mekaber's bonav, or a person is burying his sons. Al yomar lo, he shouldn't say to this person, gederach sha'amru lo chaveirav le'iyov, like the friends of Eov said to Eov, they said, halo yirascha kislasecha tikvascha v'som derechecha zechorna mihu naki avad. Essentially they said, you've been relying on your fear of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and on the fact that you are taking the proper path, that's been your hope. Do you ever recall anybody who died who was innocent? Essentially, they're saying, if bad things happen, it can't be that you're innocent. That's what they were saying to Eov, and so therefore that's not what a person should say. That's onoas devarim. Let's say the donkey drivers are asking, they're requesting grain from him. Lo yomar lahem, don't say to them, to go to so-and-so, he sells grain. But he knows that the person has never sold. That's also onoas devarim. Rabbi Yehuda says, aflo yisla einav ala mekach. A person shouldn't even look at something that's for sale. B'shah she'ein lo damim, at a time that he doesn't have money. Shaharei hadavur masr l'leiv. This is something which is given over to the heart. We don't really know what a person's intentions are. V'chol davar hamasr l'leiv, and something where it's given over to the heart, it really depends on the intentions. Onas devarim really depends on the intentions of the individual. So namar bo, that's why it says by onas devarim, v'yoreisam elokecha, you have to fear HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows what is inside somebody's heart. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, Gadol onas devarim me onas mammon. Onas devarim is greater, it's like a worse sin than onas mammon. Shezen nemar bo v'yareisam elokecha, because by onas devarim it says v'yareisam elokecha, you have to fear your God. V'zeh lo nemar bo v'yareisam elokecha, by onas mammon, it doesn't say that. You see that onas devarim is a greater sin. For Rabbi Lazar says, Zeh begufo v'zeh b'mamono. Onas devarim is against the person's body, so to speak, whereas by mammon, by onas mammon, it only has to do with the person's money, and therefore onas devarim is the greater sin. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani says, Zeh nitan leheshavan, when it comes to money, you can return money. V'zeh lo nitan leheshavan, when it comes to onas devarim, you can't return it. That's why it's the greater sin. And the Gemara continues, Tani Tana Kamed Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, a Tana, again, that's somebody who recites brises in the base medrash. He said before of Nachman bar Yitzchak, Kal Malbim Pnei Chaveiro Barabim, anybody who embarrasses his friend in public, Ki'ilu Shofech Damim, it's as if he has spilled blood, it's like murder. Amar Lei said to him, Shaper Kram, what you're saying is correct. The Chazina Lei, the Azel Sumkav Yasei Chivra, we see when a person is embarrassed, the red leaves him and he becomes pale, and so you see a certain element of murder in that situation. Amar Lei Abai Ravdimi, Abai said to Ravdimi, B'ma'arava B'mai Zahiri, in the West, what are they careful about? Meaning in Eretz Yisrael, what are they careful about? Amar Lei said, Ba'ach v'ri api, they're careful, they don't want to shame someone else. The Amar Rabbi Chanina, because Rabbi Chanina said, Hakol Yordan leGehenim, everybody goes to Gehenim chutz mishlosha, with the exception of the following three. Now the Gemara interrupts, Hakol sal gadaitach, you think he was saying everybody goes to Gehenim, that wouldn't make any sense. Ela ema kol haYordan leGehenim olim, what he means to say is everybody who goes down to Gehenim comes up, he leaves Gehenim, chutz mishlosha sheYordan ve'ein olim, except for the following three, they go down to Gehenim, but they don't come up. V'elohein, and they are as follows, Haba le'shasish, if somebody has relations with a married woman, v'hamalbim pnei chaver barabim, if somebody shames his friend, v'hamechana shem ra lechaver, when somebody uses a derogatory name for his friend. The Gemara says, mechana hainu malbin, if you use a derogatory name, isn't that the same as shaming? Why are we listing the same thing twice? And the Gemara says to that, afagav de dosh be b'shmei, even though that name is regularly used, the person is really not embarrassed by it anymore, but nevertheless, we're saying if the person's intention was that he wanted to shame him, so that also belongs in this list. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabba bar Barchana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rabba bar Barchana says that Rabbi Yochanan says, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Nun Tes Amud Aleph.